our political stand-up. I would like to welcome all the audience. My name is Piotr Łukasiewicz. I'm with the Kazimierz Pułaski Foundation. And we have only 60 minutes time, and we should have like 5 hours. So let me kick off very fast with the personal note. Having spent a couple of years in Warsaw, in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places, I witnessed personally and indirectly the outcome of the terrorist attacks. I've seen people coming into restaurants, killing, shooting indiscriminately at the patrons. I've seen the results of the trucks ramming inside the military bases, exploding. So that was the reality of, this is the reality of the modern Warsaw, if you will. And having observed in our European televisions 1 year, 2 years ago, observing with horror what is happening in restaurants in Paris, what is happening in the concert venues in Manchester, I had this very ugly realization, very emotional realization, that this is the same what I witnessed in Afghanistan, for instance, is happening right now in Europe, in our own cities. It is like, to paraphrase Mr. Nietzsche, we looked into the East, and now the East is looking back into us with a vengeance. And of course, behind this realization is obviously the question: who is doing it? Who is behind these attacks? With these questions, I'm going to direct to ask our distinguished panelists. Let me start from my left. From my left is Mr. Gilles de Kerchove, top European official and coordinator of counter-terrorism efforts in European Union. Personally, we should ask the questions about the cooperation and coordination of the various police and intelligence agencies fighting terror. Mr. Adam Baszko, Sorbonne scholar, young Polish-French scholar following the noble tradition of the old sociology, conducting field research among the Taliban, among the Jihadists in Syria, among the rebels in Congo, and Adam is also kind enough to write books about it. One of them is going to be published in a couple of days. We have also Mrs. Patrycja Sasnar. I am honored to have her here. She's a leading Polish voice on the issues that are bothering us, and will be kind to present her opinions. She's advising ministers, she's advising generals, and I only can hope that they are able to use and hear her very sober voice on the issues that are concerning us. And the last one is General Yakov Nagel, head of the National Security Council, former acting head of the National Security Council of the State of Israel, and I guess it's safe at all. But also he's an officer and gentleman who devoted his life to protect the State of Israel and the lives of the Israeli citizens. Let me start with the short question, and I'm expecting short answers. And it's kind of a maybe light question. Has President Donald Trump won the global war on terror? Is ISIS finished? And has his marvelous plans really worked when fighting terrorism? On the more serious note, I'm going to ask a simple question. Is ISIS over? Mr. Dobryshyn.
First, thank you for the invitation. First, we don't endorse the global war on terror paradigm. That was a Bush approach. We know where it led with Guantanamo, the secret CIA flights. We're not sponsoring that. But we need a military response, but it's only part of the response. And we are making significant progress. The caliphate, the physical caliphate, is nearly collapsed. And so we have removed something which allowed Daesh to be so powerful. have a proto-state to cover a huge swath of territory, which allowed them to attract 40,000 fighters from all over the world, 120 states. Extortion on the population they were controlling, which gave them a lot of money, and places where they could direct attack in the West. So that will remove an important aspect, but we should not forget that unfortunately the ideology is still there. The virtual caliphate through internet still plays a major role. There are many more terrorist attacks inspired than directed by Daesh. And finally, let's not forget Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is still around. They have learned from their mistakes. They rely on their franchises. And I will stop here. According to one good expert, you could see a possible merge between the remains of Daesh and Al-Qaeda, because the three reasons why Al-Qaeda in Iraq split into Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra have probably been removed.
Mr. Bashko, the same question?
Yeah, I agree on most points. I think Daesh as a territory...
Again, I'm asking about Mr. Trump.
is over, but saying that Trump has won anything would be to suppose that he actually created that policy. And let's be fair, the way the war was waged is policy by Obama, and it would be actually even too stretched already to call it a policy. I think the war has been won not by the United States against the Islamic State, but by the actors on the ground, with actually a lack of strategy by the United States, today a lack of allies, and we're witnessing something very strange, which is the Middle East, in which the US has no strong local allies anymore. And that's a big change. That says a lot about what's going to come next in the Middle East.
Mrs. Patricia Sastam?
I also agree with what has been said already. I mean, you cannot really debate the fact that Daesh indeed has crumbled. More than 80% of the territory as compared to June 2014 has been recuperated from them. Their finances have crumbled largely as well. More than 90% of their resources from oil production have been cut. They don't have the capacity to draw more recruits. They are not coming as compared. This has been almost zero now as compared to more than 1,500 a month at peak times. They also don't have the capacity to spread their propaganda the way they used to have. They translate it into fewer languages. It is not as sophisticated. But having said that, Daesh is only one emanation of a larger problem, and the problem, or one emanation of a current that we could call jihadism, and jihadism comes from structural problems of the Middle East, and these problems are there, and this is the economic downturn, it's the fact that in many countries more than 30% of the population lives below the national poverty line. It's that the centers or the authority in the capitals do not take responsibility for the people outside of the capitals. It's the strength of religion also that is still there, because the state is not there, and because power is not there. So Daesh being just one emanation, may be down for the moment, it may be morphing into something resembling Al-Qaeda, but different, learning on Al-Qaeda. It will not be present to the extent we think it might be in places where Al-Qaeda is, because they are in strategic competition, they compete for the same people, for the same minds and hearts. But another project may come up. They will survive as Al-Qaeda has survived, and other actually institutions have. And there is the problem of local radicalization, of local problems. So we have Boko Haram, we have Al-Shabaab. These do exist and are very strong, and this will remain as long as those structural problems in the Middle East remain. Just one last sentence. It's about outside of the Middle East, what's happening outside of the Middle East. Jihadism is an ideology that can draw people from around the world. It can draw people who are sitting in this room. And because radicalism is just a feature of human social life, and That, I think, just tells us that it will not go away. It might even be on the rise sometime in the future. But this is nothing to do with Daesh.
And General Nagel, sorry.
Okay, after hearing all these very clever notes, and I'm sure that your first question was to intrigue the Parliament to make it more lively, because you know President Trump is there only for the last year, and the war against ISIL is much longer. But I want to add things that were not said yet. First of all, no, when we fight terrorism, there are three circles. You are fighting the immediate threat, you are fighting the current existing one, you are fighting the future one. So maybe there will be a little bit shift from fighting the immediate and the current towards the future ones. But I want to spoil a little bit the party. I don't think that, some people say we have now to disarm the fears or things like this. First of all, ISIL, as was mentioned before, is one arm of the terror. There are a lot of terror hands, terror routes. If I'm looking on Israel in our experience, this is why everyone that hearing me is saying that the most dangerous word to use is the word frenemy, meaning a friendly enemy, meaning that someone is the enemy of my enemy become my friend. For example, if Iran fought ISIL, suddenly Iran became part of the solution and not part of the problem. So the radical jihadist terrorism threat is there and is there to stay. The ISIS threat, we used to say 3 years ago, and people didn't listen to us, that there are 3 pillars, as mentioned before. It's the headquarters, the economic, and the idea. So we fought now, and ISIL in Syria and Iraq, they lost the territory, they lost some very big chunk of their economic, but they didn't lost. And unfortunately, I think that there are good things or good sides for us to defeat in our area, to Europe I'm talking about, and there are bad side. The good side is that people don't tend to join losing organizations, so maybe the joining to this organization will be less. Some of them will go to other organizations. I'm not sure they are much less worse than ISIL. The second thing is that because this battlefield will disappear, they look for other battlefields, and they have still their power, and one of their favorite battlefield, unfortunately for the place that we are now, is Europe.
So thank you for this very well-structured response. So let's, after this, yes, indeed, this was kind of a light question to warm us a little bit. Let me then go into more detailed questions separate for each panelist. Mr. Dekershov, as I mentioned in the beginning, as an introduction, you are the coordinator of the various European agencies and institutions fighting terror. Are we conceivably able to say that the Islamic State was behind the attacks in Europe, recent attacks in Europe? And by organization of the attacks, I mean finances, training, sending material, preparing people. Not only, we know that the perpetrators of the attacks, they were present in Libya 2 years before the attack, 2 years before the attack. So they have a connection. But could we say, in the most cases of these attacks, that Islamic State was the organizer of the attack, or was it just a branding, just an ideological umbrella?
The threat is much more diverse than it was on the day after 9/11. So the idea that the threat is just coming from outside by people sent by Daesh or directed by Daesh is untrue. We have, as I said, a high diversity of profile, a high diversity of modus operandi. And the profile you have possibly still in Europe some prepositioned cells. We don't know how many, but they may be. We have people who were sent by the organization, and we will have to digest the return of some of our fighters. You know that Europe has had 5,000 of its citizens who went to fight alongside Daesh in a big Jabhat al-Nusra. 5,000, it's a lot of people. Many have been killed, some have already returned, but we have to be ready to digest the return of some of them. There will be highly military trained and highly radical. But most of the attack in recent months have been just inspired by people born in Europe. They may be third-generation migrants, but they are fully Europeans. And they are just inspired by the ideology. And that's what makes the life of our security service much more difficult first, because the process of radicalization is difficult to understand. It is difficult to spot this process, and when people come closer to what I call the tipping point, because being radical is not a crime in itself, it's when you start preparing something that you fall into criminal law. And spotting that, it's much more difficult than stopping someone at the border, because that's something we have improved a lot. So to answer your question, 3 out of the 48 recent attacks in Europe have been perpetrated by people returning from Syria and Iraq. So we should concentrate on homegrown terrorism, most of the time by lone actors, sometimes more structured cells, as we have seen in Barcelona, and we still have the question of the returnees. I don't believe we will have a massive flow of returnees, because a lot of them will be killed. So don't concentrate on the external threat. We have to address the major problem of domestic radicalization.
Mr. Pashko, of course there is this tendency to call Islamic State, so-called Islamic State. But nonetheless, this was the form of the state organization. It had administration, it had social services. We cannot disagree, I mean, we have to agree on that. And it was form of coherent organization, very much coherent body. But what about this coherence at the global level? And by that I mean, of course, we observe right now Islamic State is in ruin. It does not exist anymore. But can it actually copy the structure, the administration elsewhere? I mean, there are at least 8 branches right now affiliated with Islamic State. So can it be recreated elsewhere as an organization?
Yeah, I think there is a strong distinction here to make. The one between the Iraqi branch of the Islamic State, the original branch, which is highly structured, highly bureaucratized, that created a real apparatus of governance that was able to organize the reparation roads, that was able to decide on an educational policy with university to close them, and a certain set of issues in a very bureaucratical way, with the way it relates to the other branches. And here, the connection seems to be very, very loose and very opportunistic. The best illustration is Boko Haram, where the connection is mostly an issue of branding. But if you look at really what is the strongest branch of the Islamic State outside of Iraq and Syria, the one in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Islamic State Khorasan, you see that the connections are actually very low. We have very little trace even of funding of people moving, and very little ability to build territorial entities outside of Iraq and Syria. And that tells us a set of things. The first one, the connection between the branches is more a connection on agendas and on ideas and ideology, which says, by the way, that this branding of Islamic State and Caliphate really works, right? We can play the game of the so-called Islamic State, or even better what the French did, which was stop saying Islamic State, say Daesh, as if it would stop the strength of the idea. That really doesn't work. And that has to be put in perspective. The second thing is that the very same ideology works in very, very different social contexts, right? There's, in a sense, very little similarities between the marginalization of the Sunni majority in Syria, the marginalization of a Sunni minority in Iraq, the radicalization of society in Afghanistan in a shock of intervention and coming of very global dimension, and the social issues in Europe today with the lack of opportunity to migrant communities in France, in the Netherlands, or in England. And in between those very different social settings, this very same idea works. So there's no, the last thing that is important is that the reason why the Islamic State has no perspective, at least unless something very unexpected like the Arab Spring will come out, to rebuild a territorial entity is that it has a lot of competition in every place where it has branches. The strongest branch in Afghanistan has to fight against the Taliban, which is a highly organized force, and is today the main force fighting against the Islamic State. In Yemen, they have in front of them Al-Qaeda, which is much more organized and holds more territory. So, looking all in all, if the Islamic State has an ability to continue breeding and recruiting around, it has no ability to rebuild territory in the close future.
Mrs. Patricia Sasmal, in one of your articles, previous articles, you mentioned a strategic move. Strategic move of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq in 2006, 2007. They just hid in a desert after being chased by the American drones and American commando, which decapitated the leadership of the Al-Qaeda. They just chose to give a field and hide among the tribes, hide among the Sunni population, in order to survive the next few years, and then they re-emerged as the Hijra called Islamic State or Daesh. Do you think that is it possible? And I'm asking for a social background for ISIS right now in the places where they had their organization. Do you think this is possible? Is it possible that they can repeat this movement? They can repeat this, which is also based, I believe, on Quran. There was also this prophet moved to the desert at some point. So is it really possible to repeat that strategy as well today?
I mean, if hiding is a strategy, then yes, it's very easy to hide. I mean, people are they are giving themselves up, saying that they were cooks, for instance, right? All of a sudden you have plenty of cooks that were cooking only for ISIS, for Daesh, in Raqqa or elsewhere. People just don't want to say that they were doing something else for them, to them, being part of them. I guess you have, generally speaking, two kinds of people. There are those who really decided, that were decision makers within the organization. They could be intellectuals. We were just talking with Adam before the panel about that. And they can be called the core. There was the core of Al-Qaeda at some point that hid in the mountains of Afghanistan, Pakistan. There is the core, and the core has moved out, as we know, before ISIS fell. They have moved out of Syria and Lebanon. Probably they have. More than 180 leaders, commanders have been killed. This is what the Pentagon is saying. So some part of the people on top have moved away of the region, probably. Many of the people on lower echelons have stayed on in Syria and Iraq, and they will probably survive somewhere there. They may be waiting out, for instance, in Syria until time comes and the country is in transition, just to benefit from the obscure transfers of money, health programs, whatever. It's very easy to survive, really. But I think what needs to be said also with relation to what Adam just said is that there are a couple of places where ISIS could flourish potentially. Just by sending a couple of people, some inspiration, there's fertile ground. This is the Rohingya in Myanmar and Bangladesh. This is the Philippines, and we're saying that already. Probably also Egypt to some extent. I don't know exactly if it's the Sinai and the Sinai part of Daesh, or maybe mainland Egypt, is that Egypt would be a good place for them because they could have a spectacular success there, by hitting, for instance, tourists or the Coptic minority. So I guess there are a couple of spots around the world that we should be looking closely at where they are working on setting up or strengthening cells. And they have moved money as well. This is also what we know.
Thank you. General Nagel, I would like to refer to your first statement about the future. And with reference to what Mr. Kershov said about the technical ways of countering terrorism. In Europe, we lived through, as I already said, sophisticated attacks. We lived through truck attacks. We had knife attacks. So all this catalog of what State of Israel has already seen in the past. Can we actually? My question is, how did you cope with that techniques, with these behaviors of the terrorists in your country? And to what extent can we predict what's next in the catalog? Gas pipelines, poisoning water, well, the imagination is without border in this regard.
First of all, you're right. Unfortunately, I think, speak to you. I remember 6, 7, 8 years ago, my visits to some European countries, and unfortunately, I tried to spoil their celebrations from time to time. I remember walking with my good friends in France and seeing everyone around outside, and still there, it's okay, in other places, and trying to explain people, come to your question in a second, that the question is not if the terror will come, the question is when. And unfortunately, this happens.
And how?
And yes, and the way. Now, the ways are going to change all the time because it's an ongoing war. Now, I'm coming from the electronic warfare, so we always say there is the EW, and there is ECW, and there is ECCW. Always you have to have the last C, meaning the last counter one. So they're thinking, you have to think, you have always to be one step ahead. Now, what we can do, what you can learn from our experience, I'm saying that the terror is there to stay because think that even with the defeat of ISIL in Syria, the terror countries and the countries that support terror and the terror organizations learn that this is something that works and the world is not get used to. Now I want to in very short, to mention 5 points that you have to take in mind when you are preparing yourself to counter terrorism. First of all, and it was mentioned before, it's cooperation and intelligence and early warning. We have to cooperate together. We are doing it from time to time. I don't think we are doing it well enough. I'm talking about inside the EU. I'm talking about the EU with Israel and the world, US, Israel, EU, all those kind of things we can learn together. We can teach each other, and in intelligence cooperation we can even share classified information. The second thing is you have to develop what I call legal capabilities to deter terror activities and to enforce things. And here I'm saying that especially in Europe, you have to change your mind. You have to understand that countering terror is much more important from time to time than human rights. And sometimes in order to fight terrorism, you have to give up some of your human rights. You don't have to go all the way that some people are trying to go and to really kill human rights in order to fight terrorism. You have to find the right way. The third one, you have to help their economic capabilities. I call it even, let's take the cyber and use it finally on the positive thing. I call it cyber enabled economic warfare. You can use cyber and you can help them economically and of course ideally in the media. The fourth one, you have to prepare yourself for things that will happen, and unfortunately I think you have to prepare yourself also for non-conventional attacks because sometimes there are leakage of chemical, there is a potential of leakage of chemical, and when they are desperate and now they lost their battle in Syria, they can, sometimes it's Hail Mary. I'm not saying it's Hail Mary for the ISIS or other organizations, but you have to prepare yourself. When I'm talking about building the economic and legal, I'm not talking only about the terror organizations, I'm also talking about the countries that are supporting terror, especially Iran. And the last sentence, I want to make sure that, again, this is also the Israeli point of view, we have to enlarge and we have to enhance, we have to add those that are the moderate in those Islamic states, because you have to differentiate. We are not fighting, the world is not fighting against Islam or against Muslims. The world is fighting against the radical jihadist Islam. It's a totally different, they are a small minority, unfortunately some places they are leading and they are running the country, but we have to prepare ourselves to do all those 5 things. Thank you.
Thank you once again for the very well structured answer. And I have a proposition for organizers to bar the door, and we are not leaving for another 2 hours. We have such a good discussion here. Mr. Dekershov, the perception of threats is different from country to country in Europe. Poles, mostly they fear Russia. French, they fear, of course, that they fear domestic terrorism. Hungary fears refugees. Brits, they fear Brexit. How can you coordinate? Can you tell us about your work, about your function, about your role as a coordinator? How can you coordinate between various political national interests, between various threats, various perception of threats, in such a difficult environment as Europe? What can you tell us about what you do, to get these agencies, these 28 or probably even more different agencies, different nations, different agencies to work together, and what did they achieve actually? What is the level of this cooperation right now, at this very moment in Europe?
Okay, you don't give a lot of time, so it's an impossible question. The first one is that it would be a mistake to believe that, for instance, Poland would be completely immune. If I were the head of the planning unit in Raqqa and I had to move somewhere else, I would probably try to relocate in a country which is not very much mobilized by this, because I probably would enjoy a better life than being in the center of the UK or France. So the Bulgarians were the first surprised to see an attack against 4 or 5 Israeli build gas made by the Hezbollah. They had not thought that terrorism could happen in Bulgaria. So I don't suggest that anything will happen in Poland, but we have all to be prepared. Second, we belong to the same free movement zone. If we are not building the flanking measures to the free movement of people inside Schengen, Schengen will put into question. And that's one of the best achievements of the EU project. 3, and I have to be short, we have worked a lot in the last 3 years to address the problem. And to use the word of the UK ambassador in one of our high committee in Brussels, he said the quality of the conversation on counterterrorism has changed significantly. After the attack in Paris, Charlie Hebdo, and then Bataclan in Brussels, I think the top leadership in Brussels, Mr. Tusk, Mr. Juncker, they understood that we could not just be passive and support member states' prime responsibility for providing security. That when you ask citizens where they would like to see more Europe, 82% of them would like to see more Europe in the field of security. And that's why we have worked a hell of a lot to define better the phenomenon in legal terms, to fight against the financing of terrorism, to protect soft target, as was said, to improve sharing of data, and I will say a word on that, the work of the intelligence and law enforcement agencies. To prevent, I said before, we need to invest a lot more on prevent, because this process of radicalization is the main threat for the time being inside Europe. And engage more with our direct neighborhood. We have started building counterterrorism partnership with all the countries from Morocco to Turkey, including the Western Balkans. In addition to the support we provide to other places in the world, Afghanistan, Yemen, and other places like Somalia and so on. One word on the cooperation inside Europe. It is a sea change. But most of the time, people believe the problem is only a question of sharing, which would be a big mistake. On that front, both the law enforcement community and the intel community has made significant progress. We have built at Europol the e-counterterrorism center, which is very effective, and the intel community has set up a common platform. The next step is still to build a bridge between the counterterrorism group of the Intel community and the Europol Department of Counterterrorism. That's the. But you need to collect the data in the first place. You don't share something you don't have. And that's the challenge of collecting the right data, telecom data, financial data, travelers data. And here we have to find and strike the right balance with collecting data and respecting privacy. Our colleague said you have sometimes to take, to mitigate a bit human rights. In Europe, we do praise a lot human rights, and especially privacy and the protection of personal data. And it's sometimes difficult. The European Parliament is very sensitive on this, and the Court of Justice. So collect data is a challenge in itself. We're working a lot on that. And the last aspect, and probably the more difficult one, you may collect the right data, you may share a lot of data, but the problem is that our services now are confronted to a tsunami of data. It's not that we are not sharing enough, it's just the challenge is to draw the right conclusions of the tsunami of data that the services are receiving. How to prioritize, how to analyze. In most of the recent attacks in Europe, the service had the data. They knew the people, but they had not made the right assessment on the tipping point, when the radical people falls into violence and start perpetrating an attack. So Europe has done a lot, and I'm impressed because this concept of security union launched by President Juncker is very, very effective. And we are supposed to be in support of the but I think Europe is growing significantly in this area.
This is fascinating, but let me just let a little bit stay with you with the more detailed question. We all know from books that the spooks and spies they favor this culture of secrecy. Are you actually able to tear down that wall? I mean, to create the cooperation between the secret services agencies to actually, well, I don't know, reveal the sources or to be able to work on the very, on the most precious assets of each intelligence institution.
First, to believe 1 second that the head of MI5 or the head of the French DGSC sleep well at night and are not obsessed by the idea of collecting and getting and sharing all the necessary data. They do share 24/7. The question is more to connect the dots, as they said after 9/11, and make sure that we put together data collected by the security service, by the police, and data collected in the private sector. This is, and analyze this better. We are making progress. In a way, it was difficult for the security services to move from a mindset of counterintelligence, where you have the time, because you want to detect, let's say, a KGB spy infiltrating your state in the good old days, or not good old days, and you have to be extremely secretive. You only share with those who need to know. In counterterrorism, it's the reverse. You need to share as widely as possible and as quickly as possible. And that's the challenge, to move that culture of counterintelligence into a culture of counterterrorism. That's completely different. We are making significant progress. We still have to improve further. Does not need necessary to create a European FBI, but as I said, this bridge between the Intel community, the CTG, and Europol is still something we are building. So, but I'm very positive on that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Baszko, it was already mentioned during the discussion for returning fighters. The fall of Raqqa and Mosul definitely marked the end of the organization of ISIL. What about them? I mean, can we actually, should we be prepared? Of course we should be prepared, but is it really a threat? Should we expect the rise of the levels of threat connected with the phenomena of the returning fighters?
First, let me say that this phenomenon is not new. There have been people returning from the region controlled by the Islamic State since years, and only part of them were returned with an agenda. Most of them fled actually the Islamic State areas, and comes with a sort of they're blocked basically. They know they don't have future back in Europe, but at the same time they are fleeing. They don't have a place anywhere else, and they're fleeing the territory controlled by the Islamic State. Now, there are thousands of nationals from Western and not only Western countries, right? Central Asia has been with, for example, with returning fighters, and that could represent the core of a future insurgents in the same way as Al-Qaeda fighters, well, not Al-Qaeda fighters, but the Arabs fighting in Afghanistan in the 80s represented the core of an insurgency in Algeria. Europe has towards that a strategy of discreetly, but clearly trying to have the elimination of their own nationals in those territories, or at the very least, blocking them on the Syria and Iraqi territory. It's a cynical strategy, it's a logical one. The difficulty with this strategy is that the local actors, the Syrian regime, the PYD, the Kurdish regional government in Iraq, or the Iraqi regime, has not much incentive to follow the European priority. It's not their priority. Their priority is to control the territory, to try to secure this territory on the country, have those fighters leave. We had two very recent examples when Hezbollah basically provided buses to Islamic State fighters on the Syrian-Lebanese border against American very strong pressure, or when the PYD basically led hundreds of fighters from Raqqa to flee towards eastern Syria or western Iraq. Let me add something, is that the elimination of fighters in Iraq and Syria, which would not actually solve terrorism in Europe, because, and I think that's something my fellow Polish panelists have been insisting on, we have more structural problems to deal with, and there are those of the Middle East, but there are also those of Europe. The most striking feature between terrorist attackers in France is not having passed through the Syrian and Iraqi territory, but first and foremost having passed through French jails, which are underfunded and overcrowded, and where the real radicalization happens, right? When people go to Syria and Iraq, they're already radicalized for most of them. And the radicalization doesn't happen there. It happens right in France, in our jails, more than anywhere else. And the last note, in a sense, though it might be a bit provocative to say that our discussion is not the most vital one, but we tend, even in such panel on terrorism, to overestimate the importance of terrorism itself. And allow me to be a bit provocative here, but in the last 3 years, when we have this feeling of an explosion of terrorism, well, we still are on 1/3 of the attacks in the 80s, or 1/3 of the number of victims of the 80s that we looked at rather peaceful years. In a sense, I would argue that terrorism didn't come to Europe as a huge and vital threat. I would say actually come as a reverse. We had vital threats in Europe. Global warming is a vital threat. The rise of populism is a vital threat. A new economic crisis is a vital threat. And the question is less, in a sense, our most important question today is less how does terrorism rise and why our states, our societies answer to such a little threat of a few hundred deaths per year on the European continent. That's a very low number. That's a relatively low number, right? By so strong policy in terms of, I mean, the French here are the first example, are the most striking one, of putting the military in the street, of institutionalizing exception laws, of not reforming the police and the intelligence services, but staying rather on very populistic agendas rather than taking seriously the social ground and the lack in terms of quality of police and intelligence in France.
Next question to Mrs. Patricia, also but connected with the fall of the Islamic State as an organization. I know that you're observing the messaging of the Islamic State, of the fighters. Previously boasted the normal functioning state, normal functioning organization. It used to be a year, 2 years ago. They had the state. What is the messaging right now when we all actually witnessed the catastrophe of this state? How did they change? How they are preparing to spread this messianic message known from before, how they are, what is their message right now? How do they explain the catastrophe?
No, they don't explain the catastrophe. The messaging is narrower because they have narrower resources. They seem a little bit desperate. They try to take responsibility or the veil of success of attacks that were not really perpetrated by them. This is the case of the Las Vegas shooting, for example. The messaging, I can only speculate what they might be trying to do, but it has to be very general, because it's not about motivating people who are now in one place and are forming an organization, but it has to be a message that motivates people from various backgrounds, different social, economic backgrounds. And it has been so since the beginning, but maybe it will be, the emphasis will be on it now. So the message was simple. Wherever you are, whatever color is your skin, whatever language you speak, if you are one of the muwahideen, the one believing in one God, the adherents to the only good interpretation of Islam, try to strike the others, the crusaders. The different words are used, but anyway, those who are not in the camp. And the means to strike them with are important. These are simple means, such as knives or vehicles. They are not only easily acquirable, they are also cheap, and they can be acquired by anyone, and they can be used by anyone really, without any special skills. So the message is as general as it can be, and I think it will remain this way. There has been some emphasis on the French, on the Canadians, Americans, Australians. There were some nations that were picked out more than others, but I think the message is general. I just want to add, because Adam took the liberty of addressing a question that was not addressed to him, and you didn't want to talk about social background and stuff, but I just want to say that perhaps the political leadership is the messaging of the European political leadership is mistaken, because we keep saying, or we keep hearing that after each and every attack, we will try to do our best so this does not happen again. It's as if there is a possibility that this will not happen again, whereas this will most certainly happen again. There is no preparation, no preparing of the societies for the terrorism that is to come. And it has been with us since 200 years at least. You know, Peter Kropotkin, the father of Russian anarchists, would say in 1905 or something like that, no pamphlets, no 100,000 pamphlets will do the work of one single terror attack. Terror attack is a tool of the most radicalized, and people do get radicalized. It's a natural thing of the social life. So maybe the messaging not of ISIS is what we should worry about, but the messaging of our own leaders to be prepared for it. It's not a physical threat, not a substantial physical threat, it's a political threat. How many people die in the streets of Poland every year? 3,000 people die in car accidents.
I see the great potential for Mr. Dekreshev to answer that. Please, I'm very short answer, and this is a question to you. How to explain the public the question just Patricia asked.
You want me to answer?
Yes.
I do agree. If you look at numbers, probably more women sleeping in the bathroom than people keep
That's the Barack Obama's.
But that's, yeah, but it raises different issues. First, media amplification. It's not just politicians. We have to ask ourselves if it's balanced. So there is this. I do agree, communication. That's something on which I worked a lot, and I convinced 3 years ago the Commission to support an initiative to improve the way government do communicate. We're not strategic in our communication. And so we have a team of experts now traveling throughout Europe to advise government, first on the way they themselves should communicate, but also to mobilize civil society to to have themselves a better discourse, and we are working on it. So that's true. Communication is very important, again, working on prevent. And you said it's irrelevant. Probably yes, in terms of numbers so far, but you know, the development of the high technology is enable a lone actor now to perpetrate a terrorist attack with catastrophic consequences. Miniaturization. Cyber. There is not something like cyber terrorism yet, but I would not be surprised if before 5 years there be something like cyber terrorism. We mentioned drones, and you mentioned chemical stuff.
There is cyber terrorism.
Not the way I see it, entering into the SCADA of a nuclear plant or an electrical grid so far. Some state can do this, but not a terrorist organization yet. But let's suppose a drone with chemical substances on a football stadium. So we have, it's still serious because the catastrophic consequence will have a major impact. 2 or 3 miniaturization with 25 grams of explosive can blow up a jumbo. Look at the consequence for the world economy if 2 or 3 or 5 planes blows up at the same time. So yes, it looks irrelevant in terms of number, but also scientific. And finally, work on resilience. And that's probably something we have to learn from some of the states. Israel is one of them.
General, can we actually kill the idea? Can we kill the cyber caliphate? I mean, what's your experience in Israel in that? And in the same fashion as we just...
Again, it's not a cyber caliphate because, you know, the caliphate is an idea, and, you know, there's only one, but there are the biggest difference between the ISIL and others, someone calls them moderate, is the caliphate want everyone solution now. And for example, the imams want the solution later. They are willing to do it slower. But I want to add to the thing that was just mentioned here, and I want to say my voice. No, the saying is that the difference between a pessimist and an optimist is, I'm an optimist, but the difference between a pessimist and an optimist, that the pessimist is an optimist with experience. So I'm now an optimist with experience. So I'm saying you cannot kill the idea of the terror. It will there to remain. But, and again, I said before, I don't want to spoil what you're saying, to disarming the fears. You cannot disarm the fears. You can prepare yourself for the fears. And if I will just use some of the words of the prophets, said one before, in the future, that the wolf will live together with the sheep. I want to put 2 advices. First of all, it's right. Maybe in the future, the wolf will live together with the sheep. In this case, I prefer to be the wolf and not the sheep. And the second thing, the last time I looked on the places that the wolf are sleeping together or living together with the sheep, is because that every morning they are replacing the sheep. Now, this is why I think we have to prepare ourselves. Now, if I want to add to what the gentleman just said before, the problem of the data, the cyber. Yes, there is a problem of big data. This is where the economy is coming. This is where the cyber is coming from the positive side of the machine learning, artificial learning, deep learning. We can deal with big data. It's a different way. You have to think different. You have to program the problem together. This is for sure something that we can share, because you can share technology in these issues or thinking without sharing the database. So you can share the way of realizing and analyzing the big data, sometimes without giving and your asset is the data. It's not a database, it's the data in the database. And I know that there are cooperations and some universities, I'm now in the technical professor, we are building things, other places in Israel are doing it, I know in the world they are looking, and the good, promising thing is that the big economies, Facebook, Google, those that can put billions of dollars for these issues, they are also investing in this technology. They need it for other reasons. But the technology of this artificial intelligence that we talked about 30 years ago, we couldn't make systems, it's changing today, and this is for sure a good base for cooperation.
I really hate to break this more and more fascinating discussion, but we have a couple of minutes for one or two questions from the audience. 3, 4, 5, 6 questions from the audience. Well, please, I cannot see you, so please decide among yourselves who is asking the question.
I'm on the first row, so I get to talk first now.
The first will be last.
Thank you so much.
But just very, very, please do refrain from comments, but rather ask the questions.
Well, it's a very short comment.
Okay.
My name is Terrorism. I'm from Israel. I'm a lawyer, and I deal with security issues. And I agree very much with the comment by the general about having to use the law to combat terrorism. However, I do feel it's very important to point out, as someone who comes from a tactical background, I served as a combat soldier in the IDF, as a police officer for 10 years, and now I'm a military lawyer in the reserves. And I can tell you that Israel very rarely compromises on issues of human rights while fighting terrorism. We have very extensive and very modern laws, including private security, by the way. The first responders in our country to terrorist attacks are first responders who are armed, private security first responders who are armed and have a certain degree of use of powers to detain someone, including use of force until the police arrives. And I urge all the participants to look into these laws and try to implement them in their countries, because they're wonderful laws.
Thank you very much. So maybe a question, yeah, Mr. I see clearly Dr. Gebert.
Constante Gebert, CFR. As we've learned from Monsieur Kershaw, the overwhelming majority of the perpetrators of terrorist attacks are Europeans. Yet, in many European countries, and Poland unfortunately leads the list, there is growing propaganda that refugees equal Muslims equal terrorists, which, if anything, creates the very conditions that facilitate radicalization. I would think this is an issue of security. We're actually undermining ourselves. I mean, you don't have to be a radical Muslim to feel offended by people screaming on the street, I quote, "fuck Allah." Is there anything that, from a security perspective, we can do about reducing the incentive to radicalization inside our societies?
We are, of course, very well aware of this simplistic or this toxic mix between migration and terrorism, which is terrible. And that's why I think for several years I've been fighting hard to convince the system to be much more effective at the external border, because it takes only 1 or 2 persons to sneak into the migration flow and commit a terrorist attack to spoil the whole file, and to have the consequence that you suggested, that we are less receptive to provide protection to those who need international protection, and we have this very sad attitude. And that's the reason why in the recent 2-3 years we now have systematic check on the EU citizens when they cross the external border, why we have made a lot of effort at the external border to create a hotspot where all the security players work together, Europol, Frontex, Eurojust, EASO, national liaison officers, with Fed, and use much more the database. And I don't suggest we will stop and detect each and every returnee, but it's much better control than it was before. So the first response is to be effective at the border, and of course, in the discourse, stop this association. That's why I insist so much that it's in most of the attack in recent years and months, the people have not traveled to Iraq and Syria. They have no contact with the organization. They just claim they are part of Daesh at the very last moment. So we should disconnect these two files, but be effective at the point.
Okay, last very short 2 questions, but I will take one from the gentleman here, I promise, and one from the lady from the audience. If I may encourage you, ladies, to ask the question as well, please.
Thank you. USL Associate Professor. Well, we are on the same page in terms of countering violent extremism and so on. But when it comes to counter-terrorism strategy, with the exception of the last speaker, I haven't heard anything addressing to broader and more comprehensive counter-terrorism. And my question comes right here. To what extent and until when the EU will keep treating terrorism from certain region and from certain group as almost exclusive threat that is leading to ignore and overlook at Europe's peril, most likely, threats such as from PKK terrorism, such as from extreme right-wing movements and so on. So when we talk about counter-terrorism, isn't it time to consider those things timely? That's my question. Thank you.
I'm not sure I got 100% the question, but I can tell you, for the time being, the main threat comes from Daesh or Al-Qaeda, I would say Jihadist terrorism. But we're not, we're working on other forms of terrorist group. You mentioned the PKK, it's on the terrorist list of the European Union. And myself have been very active to encourage all member states to crack down on the PKK in Europe. They're not mounting attack in Europe, but they collect money, around 20 million, that is used in Turkey to mount attack against the Turks. So it's very important, and we have to help the Turks on that front. We put the military branch of the Hezbollah on the terrorist list of the European Union. So, and you rightly pinpoint the right-wing extremism. Breivik was one good example in Norway. And this can feed each other. Right-wing can be fed by a sort of Islamophobic discourse, can feed the Islamic discourse, which in turn may feed radicalization as well. So we're not obsessed by Islamic-related terrorism, but for the time being it's a more serious one.
If I can may add, I think terrorism is terrorism, never mind if it's coming. As I said before, now the one that's threatening Europe and the world is the radical Islamic, but there are also other. Some of them are the same problem with another foot. What I'm saying is that the preparedness against them, the point that I mentioned before, can work against all kinds of terrorism, and sometimes it's much easier to kill them when they're still young and small, not to wait. And when I mentioned before, it's not against it, when I mentioned that you have to change some of the laws and maybe give up some human rights, I'm not saying giving up human rights. I'm saying changing the laws so the human rights that you are keeping are the real human rights that you want to keep and not in the name of keeping the human rights. This is exactly what Israel is doing. We are keeping, I think, one of the most keepers of human rights in the world. But there are areas that you have to make sure, especially, as you mentioned before, collecting data, using it only after a charge will give you, but those kind of things also can work against those terror activities that are not only jihadist or terror of radicals.
Adam?
If you allow me to react, because we've had a longer discussion, a very interesting idea of making Israel as an example of what should or should not be done. I think that's an excellent example, but in a very different way. I think what Israel shows very well to us Europeans is that a security paradigm does not work. Does not work in the sense that you can kill as many terrorists as you want. You can modify the law, which I would not argue is the most comprehensive in terms of respect of human rights, in terms of killing terrorists. The first effect is fracturing your own society. And what I mean by that is that one of the main risks that we have when we look mostly at high-end, very unlikely attacks is that we build policy that destroy the basis of our own social cohesion in our own countries, which is much more risky and much more likely than attacks of which we've been threatening for years and years, the big attacks that still do not happen.
Discussion is becoming heated when we are talking about us actually, not about terrorists. Patricia, would you like to comment on what Mr. Geber said about this refugees equals terrorists equals parasites? as well as this disgusting comment from one of the politicians in Poland was made. Can you add something to that, specifically from the Polish?
Yes, well, Poland is a very specific example of a country which does not have a Muslim or migration from the Muslim world, and yet it is a society that mostly fears this kind of migration. I think it only shows you how twisted the logic can be and how dangerous it can be if you find an enemy that's actually an outsider enemy, an enemy that can bring up the xenophobia that's somehow existing in each and every nation. And it is true that among the migrants that did come from the Middle East, some of the terrorists who did perpetrate the Bataclan attack, that they were there, they did come in that wave. They might have filed for asylum. They might have gone through the same process as others. But if you deal with a number of more than 1 million people, there will always be the good ones in there and the bad ones. I think it's the one thing that worries me mostly is that if you look in history at the way wars began, they hardly ever begin by attacking another nation. First, you need to brace, you need to find legitimacy for a war within. So you need to find an enemy to consolidate the society, to consolidate the people to support you. This is actually how the Second World War started. It didn't start in 1939, it started earlier with what was happening in Germany within, and actually in other countries as well. You needed to consolidate the people to find the enemy. And the enemy is within. The other is here, next door. It is not in the Middle East. It is somewhere around here. It's in the block that I live in. And this is the worrying rhetoric, that it actually brings up violence. It's a vicious circle. Violence breeds violence. And it just takes leadership, I think, political leadership, to structure the message correctly. Because politics is a realm of miracles. You can do everything there. You change people's ideas. You change their attitudes to life. You can bring them up. You can lift them. You can show them the sky. This is not what's happening now.
And with that, I would like to conclude our panel. I think this is well deserved round of applause